Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tracing the complex history of Al-Qaeda, unpacking exactly how it morphed from a localized logistical desk into a global, decentralized franchise. We're going to look closely at how historical events, ideological shifts, and even technological advancements forced this organization to constantly adapt its structure over the past few decades.
We've got four main phases to cover today: origins in the Afghan War, the founding of Al-Qaeda, the ideological shift, and finally, their transition into a decentralized franchise network. Let's get right into it.
Just to be clear from the jump, to ensure we're analyzing this impartially, we rely heavily on objective, policy-driven source material, like reports from the Congressional Research Service, alongside historical records and counterterrorism analyses. Our goal here isn't to take a political stance. We just want to break down the facts and structure of the source material so we can clearly understand the history and mechanics of the group.
All right, Section 1. Origins in the Afghan War, the Soviet occupation. So, think back to the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. You had thousands of foreign fighters, the Arab Mujahideen, flooding into the region to fight alongside the native Afghan resistance. A massive influx of people like that needs serious logistics, and that necessity drove some critical developments in 1984 and ultimately 1988.
The real foundation here was the Maktab al-Khidamat, or the MAK, founded in 1984 by a highly influential Palestinian Islamic scholar named Abdullah Azzam, along with a young, wealthy Saudi you've definitely heard of, Osama bin Laden. The MAK was essentially the organizational forerunner to Al-Qaeda. Think of it as a global hub for funding and recruitment. They literally set up offices all over the world, even in Western countries, raking in immense capital and funneling fighters straight to the Afghan front lines.
Now, you have to remember the Cold War context here. The Afghan Mujahideen were largely viewed as allies against the Soviets. Through a CIA program called Operation Cyclone, the United States pumped billions of dollars in covert backing through Pakistan's intelligence agency to arm the Afghan factions. While U.S. officials maintain they didn't directly fund the foreign Arab volunteers, this massive wave of resources created an incredibly fertile environment for networks like the MAK to thrive and build highly capable paramilitary camps.
Which brings us to Section 2, founding of Al-Qaeda, from logistical bureau to the base. What's fascinating here is how the group adapted to survive when the Soviets eventually packed up and left.
The war was ending, and the original purpose of the MAK was dissolving. But instead of simply going home, the leadership pivoted. On August 11, 1988, bin Laden, Azzam, and leaders from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad decided to pool their resources and officially form Al-Qaeda. In Arabic, that translates to the base. The idea was to take all that combat experience and the global network they had just built in Afghanistan and export it to other conflicts around the globe.
Moving on to Section 3, the ideological shift, redefining the mission. Having built the base, the founders now had a massive dispute over exactly how to use it.
A really sharp ideological rift divided the leadership. On one side, Abdullah Azzam envisioned Al-Qaeda as this traditional, defensive, rapid reaction force that would step in to protect Muslim territories when they were threatened. But Osama bin Laden? He was heavily influenced by Egyptian strategist Ayman al-Zawahiri, and they wanted something way more aggressive. They wanted to attack the far enemy, meaning the United States, to ultimately topple secular, pro-Western regimes in the Arab world. After Azzam was mysteriously assassinated in 1999, bin Laden took total control.
Was bin Laden and Zawahiri calling the shots? The group radically redefined some foundational Islamic concepts to justify their extremist grand strategy. For your average Muslim, jihad often represents an internal spiritual struggle, and dawah means preaching or charitable social action. Al-Qaeda totally flipped this. They strictly redefined jihad exclusively as violent, armed warfare. And dawah? They redefined that simply as the act of recruiting others to join that specific violent war.
When you look at intelligence reports and the group's own foundational texts, their stated objectives became uncompromisingly radical. We're talking about expelling anyone they deemed a non-Muslim occupier, including diplomats and businessmen from the Middle East. From there, they aimed to impose their extremist view of Sharia law and ultimately build a massive global Islamic caliphate. Obviously, these hardline goals set the stage for decades of global conflict that would eventually touch shores worldwide.
To actually manage these sweeping goals throughout the 1990s, Al-Qaeda operated remarkably like a multinational corporation.
Bin Laden was basically an agile CEO directing a strict hierarchy from his sanctuary back in Afghanistan. He oversaw specialized committees, a military committee for planning attacks, a finance committee, and an information committee for propaganda. It was a highly centralized machine. Major plots were orchestrated and approved right from the top. And that leads us to our final part, Section 4, the decentralized franchise network, adapting to survive. The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan completely obliterated their physical headquarters and training camps, forcing an ultimate structural mutation.
Under immense military pressure, the group deliberately morphed from that centralized corporation into a complex, four-tiered, decentralized franchise network. Counterterrorism analysts break it down like this. You now have the core leadership in hiding. Formal affiliates who swear allegiance, like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Allied groups who just cooperate on specific goals. And finally, self-radicalized, inspired individuals who have absolutely no direct contact with the leadership at all.
It's a fascinating, albeit dark, survival mechanism. Al-Qaeda essentially began mimicking the decentralized, centerless architecture of the internet itself. With their physical camps wiped out, the digital realm became their new sanctuary, allowing them to transform into a completely borderless, ideological franchise.
The internet literally became their new training ground and command center, and honestly, their sophistication here was alarming. They developed highly technical digital tools to recruit and operate globally. We're talking about establishing Al-Sahab, an in-house studio dropping documentary-quality videos, the Al-Fajr Media Center for decentralized hack-proof distribution, an English-language publication called Inspire Magazine to target Western recruits, and they relied heavily on PGP encryption to keep their communications hidden from intelligence agencies.
So, what makes this model so incredibly dangerous? It grants regional affiliates, whether they're in Yemen, Somalia, or North Africa, total tactical independence. The core leadership, like Ayman al-Zawahiri before his death, focused purely on setting the broad ideological narrative and strategic vision, but they left the day-to-day operations and local attacks entirely in the hands of the regional commanders.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, especially when you think about the 2022 drone strike that killed Ayman al-Zawahiri. If an organization has successfully evolved from a physical hierarchy into a virtual internet-fueled franchise made up of independently operating regional nodes, can decapitating its historical leadership ever truly destroy the network? It's a complex, difficult question that continues to define global counterterrorism strategy today. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures behind the headlines.